Let's get centered. This week, will social media companies lose Section 230 protections in the wake of growing polarization? We'll ask special guest Sasha Mainrath, the Palmer Chair in Telecommunications at Penn State University. Plus, the FCC pressures ABC and its affiliates to pull down Jimmy Kimmel. Is freedom of speech dead? And as U.S. troops return to Panama, we'll hear from Carlos Ruiz-Hernández, Panama's former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, on this new era of American involvement in the region. I'm Louis Miranda alongside Carl Meacham and Jeremy Murphy. We have two terrific guests today and really timely on both fronts. I can't remember a time when freedom of speech seemed as fragile as it does today. We're seeing very viscerally in how Jimmy Kimmel was pulled off the air. But it's also long been an issue online where Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act has essentially protected internet companies from any kind of accountability for what others post on their platforms. That has allowed upstarts like Facebook and Twitter and others to build from practically nothing into major economic and societal players. But it's also allowed unfettered growth of mis and disinformation. And it's contributed to polarization by creating platforms that essentially enable fringe political interests to unite and to grow. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, many figures, including Lindsey Graham, Republican senator from South Carolina, have been out calling for an end to, or at least a fix to, Section 230 to address the radicalization and the polarization that's happening online.
When I heard yesterday about Jimmy Kimmel, ABC taking him off the air temporarily or until further notice, it's not a First Amendment issue. It's a FCC issue, and it just so happens, ABC, the networks all have affiliates, so there's like 200 affiliates per network around the country, and they're all owned by separate companies, and a lot of these companies are for sale. So Nexstar is one of their biggest affiliate owners, is buying another company called Tegna, which is another big company, and then Sinclair is another big company, and they're all trying to buy and sell each other. And for that, they need the FCC. They need the broadcast licenses need to be transferred,
Yeah.
and that's the cudgel. That's where the Trump administration uses it. And so that's really how this happened, was they got in the way of these sales. I don't think it was a First Amendment issue. It is in the sense that they're trying to silence him, but they're using these station license transfers as a way to do it.
It's a good way to bring in our guest, where we couldn't have a better person to talk about that. And of course, the broader Section 230 questions. Welcome, Sasha Mainrath. It's so good to see you, man.
It's
Been
great
too
to see
long.
you again, Luis. It's been a while.
Yeah. So, Sasha, you are the Palmer Chair in Telecommunications at Penn State. You're also the founder and director of the X Lab, which is an innovative think tank focused on the intersection of technology and public policy.
And that you helped with way back in the day. I mean,
way
thank
back
you,
in the day,
sir.
a proud thing to have helped launch it. But you were also the vice president at the New America Foundation, where you built the Open Technology Institute into one of the largest public interest tech policy organizations in DC. It's still around, still doing great work.
We just celebrated the 15 years of the public launch last week. So yeah, very
That's
timely.
amazing. Yeah. And of course, you've dedicated your career to helping decision makers, leveraging data, context in the fields of telecom, spectrum policy, broadband connectivity.
Yeah.
So we really couldn't think of anyone better as this Charlie Kirk, the fallout of the assassination really starts to come into focus. Section 230 is once again at issue, and it's never really gone away, but there's been sort of momentum and then faltering, and then I don't know that anything's really changed. You've written about the remarkable opportunity that digital media platforms provide for bolstering civil discourse, but of course also the problems that it creates with mis and disinformation. Can you walk our audience through the basics of Section 230 and where the regulatory process stands?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. This is an incredibly timely topic, and few are brave enough to dive into something that both directly impacts our lived lives in myriad ways and is kind of completely below the radar. If you tell the average American, like, yeah, man, Section 230, thank goodness for that, right? They'd have no idea what you're talking about. And what Section 230 does in a digital era is divorce the notion that the carrier of information, say the place where we're putting this podcast, is responsible for the content of that, which means that whatever crazy thing I'm about to say, that the person that's hosting the podcast isn't responsible for what I myself am saying.
And thank God for that.
And thank goodness for that, because but long story short, this is fundamentally important. You can't have an open medium of communication if the purveyor of that medium, the host, the social media platform, and et cetera, is responsible for every crazy thing coming out of the mouths or being posted or the comments being made on issues of the day. And this is, brought to the fore with Charlie Kirk and company, but has been a long-standing tension. Now, where things get much more complicated is that it is one thing to say, hey, look, we're just this neutral platform and anyone can say anything and we're going to equally have that information available. It's a very different thing than, say, when you are purposefully editorializing, curating, elevating, removing content. That puts you into something that was not envisioned when Section 230 was created. Because back then you basically had this very simple thing, like you post and the thing goes up and then it's just there, and it's like early feeds on Facebook. It was like, hey, look, it's just this linear what was posted when amongst my friends. If you look at the bulletin boards that predate that, it was like every comment in order, threaded by conversation, and that was it. Now we have an era where the platforms themselves are not a neutral platform that's just equally treating all content, but are in the mix. So the algorithms themselves are elevating some content, diminishing the reach of others. And of course, the content that platforms love most is the one that drives engagement, which intersects with the ones that piss us off the most. And that leads to the elevation of propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, all the worst excesses. Which is to say, what we have then is a privileging of the Charlie Kirks of the world, simply because what they're saying is so provocative. And into that, we now have post Charlie Kirk's murder, this situation where having any conversation on these platforms is itself being, in essence, curated, policed, taken down, leading to all sorts of things for the purveyors of that are themselves kind of very different than the original notion of Section 230, which is that the platform is neutral. It's an open platform for anyone to participate in, and that those platforms shouldn't be responsible for the content that runs on top of them. And solving that problem, which I've spent many years pondering and contemplating and coming up with ways to do that, is very fraught. Because obviously we would never want a federal government engaging in violations of free speech. There's a lot of speech out there that I find personally abhorrent, but living in a functional participatory democracy means heterodoxy, differences of opinion, and et cetera. And then all of that is then layered on top of hate speech and other speech that is disallowed. And Section 230 is the catalyst in which all of these different problems are currently legally framed out. And it's old. It's predicated on yesteryear's technological realities without addressing AI-generated content, algorithms, and a fundamental business model that is not necessarily elevating things equitably or even in the best interest of society as a whole.
So I have a question. When when Facebook or any of these platforms start editing or start saying yes to something and no to something, how are they different than a publisher?
Yeah, I mean, they're similar to a publisher, right? So, but it's it's not so much that they are editing, it happens occasionally, but it's rare that they edit the individual postings. It's more about you elevate one screed or another, you diminish or eliminate or censure various things. But they're kissing cousins for sure. I think you're onto something there, Jeremy, that in essence, it is an active role. And in the same way, you would not say, oh, a newspaper shouldn't be liable for whatever is published in the editorial pages, right? And again, they say like, look, we are not necessarily taking the position of what's published there. But if I publish like a call to riot in my newspaper, guess what? I am liable for doing that. And the question then becomes, if I'm a platform and I'm elevating a call for riot, should I be treated like a newspaper publisher, or should I be treated like a park where people just happen to be having a riot?
Right.
And yet it seems like the intent of trying to filter the more fringe language is sort of what has us in a pickle right now, because you had efforts by Facebook and Twitter and others, and there were times when speech that was deemed as problematic resulted in President Trump himself losing his social media accounts or having them turned off for a pretty extended period of time. And now those same people are in power again. And now it seems that they're overreaching in trying to curtail anyone who is in opposition to them, sort of just in this balance. So can we fix this problem without breaking the internet? I think is the biggest question I have.
For sure. And again, I mean, you're being very kind. I would say we are engaging in outright censorship and censorial action against very specific First Amendment protected positions, right? It doesn't matter what side of the Israeli-Palestinian battlefront you find yourself. The notion that you can't talk about the genocide happening there without being labeled sort of an anti-Jewish terrorist supporting entity is a real problem. And the fact that it looks likely that in the near future, Trump is going to come out with a series of executive orders targeting civil society predicated upon that is about as close as you would get in US history to direct explicit censorship. It calls back to McCarthyism, it calls back to the Palmer raids, the Espionage Act, it calls back to the abolitionists of the 1850s and what they were facing. Like, this is a very bleak moment. The differentiator today versus yesteryear is the reach with which that censorial action can be facilitated. So the platforms are now not only not neutral arbiters of conversation and discourse, they are actively collaborating with the US government to ferret out what has been unilaterally decided to be acceptable and unacceptable speech, with unacceptable speech not being frowned upon, but being actively attacked with antagonistic, felonious accusations. Like, this is very, very bad. And it looks very similar to all of the work that I've done for years on internet freedom internationally, where we're fighting against like the People's Republic of China's censorial action and Iran and North Korea. And I'm like, wow, you would be hard pressed to see light between the positioning of some of the most authoritarian regimes on the planet and what is being proposed in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. This is very bleak.
And it's not, there's no clear lines either. I think it's worth mentioning that too, because it's easy to get labeled as a Zionist in a very hateful way from the other side. It's just, the people in government in power right now take the other position. And there's not even clarity in those lines, because if you look at the dividing lines that we've been now exposed to in the wake of this, for example, between Nick Fuentes, who is ostensibly a sort of figurehead of the Groypers, who is much more anti-government and who saw Charlie Kirk as a shill of corporate America. He didn't like that Charlie Kirk was pro-Israel. And so there's not a clear dividing line of left, right, or anything else. It's just who happens to have the bat at the FCC, it seems like, that can exert pressure.
I have a question about 230. It's always like you look at the intent. And when this was part of legislation, the intent was good, right? We wanted to give a very long runway to this. Is the time, has that runway ended now? Or what do you think we need to do?
Well, so number one, Section 230 is a saving grace for online discourse, connection, building community, facilitating conversation. It is the foundation for our modern era where we can have this podcast. Without that, you could not have your show.
Right.
Because somebody's going to come on and say something at some point that would run afoul of acceptable discourse, the Overton window, or somebody saying something that could be taken out of context as an illegal statement, and the purveyor, the host of this podcast, would then be liable without Section 230. So it is absolutely essential. But it was built for this moment before the platforms were curating their own content. They are an open platform that anyone can post to, but they're also like the editorial pages of a newspaper, in that what you privilege there, what people see, what gets propagated is wildly different. So, and you can see this sometimes very, very directly, right? Elon Musk buys Twitter, changes it to X, and literally elevates his own posts above all others. Right? He is judge, jury, and executioner for what he says, and that is not an open platform. Should X then be liable for what he is spewing? And I would say, yeah, that tension point is very real, and we need to frame out something that's very different than a completely laissez-faire policy where no content comes under the purview of, in essence, liability, which is what these platforms are hiding behind. That no matter how much we actually are instigating January 6th riots, a pogrom, neo-McCarthyism, et cetera, that we are not liable. And I would reject that. I would say, no, you are actually privileging certain content and driving something, in many cases driving illegal action for your business model. And that is very different than being a neutral platform.
And there's also that thing every now and then you get a thing from Facebook or Instagram saying that they own your content. And it's like, wait a minute. Wait.
Yeah, that simply by rote of publishing on the platform that you've granted copyright over your own media to that platform is we could talk about copyright and those dysfunctions for a whole other podcast, because it is a mess. But my favorite is the Lessig versus Phoenix Music. So Larry Lessig is one of the preeminent First Amendment fair use scholars in the country. And he posted a video of him explaining your fair use rights, and got what's called a Digital Millennial Copyright Act, a DMCA takedown notice, that of all the people in the world that you don't want to do that to, Larry Lessig is literally number one, and hijinks ensues. But long story short, yes, when it comes to copyright, you very much see the platforms actively engaging in censorship of content, even when you have a fair use right to that content. And that points to this notion of like, hey, these are not neutral. In fact, they are doing very active curation of content, sometimes in direct violation of our rights.
A lot of creators actively avoid fair use.
I want to drive back to something that Sasha said a little earlier.
Sure, go for it.
It's super important, and it's great. It's great to have you, Sasha.
Thanks.
That outrage drives engagement, and then outrage sells.
Yes.
And you look at these situations and you wonder, is this, because we're talking about the First Amendment side of this, but we're not talking about the capitalism side of this. And that seems to be sort of the driver here.
Yes.
If you get a lot of engagement, you get a lot of outrage or whatever in order to get things moving, right? You're gonna sell. My questions to you have more to do with what type of regulation, because there's the legal regulation that you're highlighting, but then there's, it's the market. At the end of the day, it's the market. I mean, we saw this with Charlie Kirk's after he was murdered, if you just look at your feed, it's just flooded with Charlie Kirk, and every type of Charlie Kirk. So the question then becomes, are there any people for and people against, right? People promoting and people that undercutting. Is there any kind of restriction that can be placed in order to address that side of the discussion? I mean, I think nobody wants to, and Tucker Carlson today was out with a piece, nobody wants to restrict, freedom of expression. And that goes for every side. But there is this...
I'm not sure that's true, but yeah, go on.
Well, I mean, everybody wants to hear their own take, right? And promote their own take, as long as, and that's what they use to say promoting freedom of expression, right, Lise? But I guess the question is, like, what restrictions can be placed that would be still in line with freedom of expression and in line with the capitalist reality that we're living in?
Yeah. Well, and this is you've asked the right question. Answering it is a doozy because it points to a fundamental tension.
Yeah.
Right. Between free speech rights, which exist and are enshrined in the Constitution, and then the freedom from hate speech and others, right? So this, again, like, you can look back at the philosophical underpinnings for this and what have you, and that'd be a lovely podcast. But in law, it gets very messy because you're like, well, it is a tension point, and there is not a singular big red easy button that you push and they're like, we solved that. It's part of this ongoing conversation about the normative, agreeable discourse. And whereas there's certain things that we agree are disallowed, like hate speech, actively organizing insurrection, things of that ilk, there's a lot of speech that's abhorrent but entirely legal. And I would put a lot of what we're seeing right now is trying to make things we disagree with either deprivileged, outright censored, or in essence, open then to being declared to be a terrorist support network or a terrorist support organization. That is very anti-American. And I say that because I think this is why you also have on both sides of the aisle, amongst libertarian right and progressive or like rights-abiding left, this agreement, a kumbaya moment amidst the strife, where people are like, yeah, you know what? Like, the government should not be involved in censoring free speech activities. We can agree on that, even if we have differences of opinion about whether we agree with the message itself. And we are now at a moment, right? If it's true that this EO from the White House is going to drop on Sunday when Trump gets back from the UK, targeting civil society writ large over what is very clearly free speech protected statements, we've entered a whole new realm that we haven't seen really since the civil rights era and McCarthyism. And so it's very precedented what's happening. What's unprecedented is, so what's then the role of all of these platforms? Are they like actively, like, are they the Vichy government of the digital era? Are they actively conspiring in order to round up the ne'er-do-wells as defined by an authoritarian government? And I would say, when we look at things like, House Judiciary in December of 2024, so into the twilight of the Biden administration, issued a scathing report about the weaponization of our financial systems and the fact that our banks, without a warrant, were turning over personal financial information to the government. And I abhor that. Even if it was done to round up people from the January 6th riots, that is not the way rule of law should operate. The fact that the same people that were rightfully screaming bloody murder about that complicitness from corporate America are today saying that corporate America should do that exact thing as long as they're targeting the left. It shows a fundamental lack of integrity amongst certain arms of mostly the MAGA right that is now causing a schism, because the libertarian right is like, no, this is bad no matter who's being targeted. We should not do this. And I think privileging that commonality, which is not sort of like, oh, rush towards the milk toastian, squishy nothingness. It's like, these are big, bold statements on across the aisle saying, hey, look, this is fundamentally bad for participatory democracy.
Yeah,
Which
it's
again
interesting.
brings us back to Section 230, which is like, we envisioned a realm where we would have contended speech in a public forum and wanted to privilege that. And now we are working diligently to undo that free zone of active communication. Sorry, Luis, I cut you off.
No worries. I think for a lot of people, it feels abstract. And so one of the ways that I've talked about it in the past is like, imagine that you are building a town and you're put in charge, whether it's in the construction context or whatever way, of building the public square. Now, all of a sudden, you're responsible for anything anyone says there. And that is easier, I think, to sort of comprehend, that like, well, you shouldn't be held accountable for anything anyone says in a public square that you built. But of course, you can also be held accountable for things that you did that may be negligent, that led to injury on that space. And I've sort of tried to equate that kind of like more physical idea to the digital space, where, you know, when I was at DHS, one of the challenges we had around mis and disinformation is you have a flood or a tornado or something hit, and there's people who actively online are trying to misdirect people away from aid, away from water, away from the help that they need. And that's incredibly problematic, and one, crazy that even happens in the first place. But it's an example of how, you know, there's kind of a crowded, screaming fire in a crowded theater kind of approach that we can take. And so you've argued that we can do some liability reform. Can you talk to us a little bit about sort of the details of those steps that you think might work, and how they might work better than what the European model has been?
Right. So as Carl points out, this is a sticky wicket wrapped in a Gordian knot. It's a mess to solve for. But the first step is even understanding, like, so what's being done here, right? We don't even have transparency into the ways in which certain speech is being privileged, other speech is being censored. And so, you know, step one of the policy framework that we developed many years ago was like, we actually do need to audit what these algorithms are doing that are actually curating the material. Unlike an editor where you can just go and ask them, hey, why did this end up here and this ended up there? This is all black box. We have no disclosure or transparency about how they're doing this. So that's step one. From there, you can start having the conversation to be like, oh, wow, I see you're doing this. You've got a park with a soapbox, but only KKK members can speak on it. That's bad, right? Then if we know that's how it's being operationalized, then we can address that problem. And that would then lead into an ever escalating series of repercussions. We want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Oftentimes these algorithms are doing stuff where you're like, whoa, you shouldn't be doing that. And they're like, you're right, we should not be doing that, right? So we've had prior eras where it's like women were being offered jobs in advertising that paid less than men. Users of MacBooks were getting higher airfares than if you used a PC. If you had an African-American sounding name, whatever the algorithm determined that was, you were more likely to get like bail bonds advertising and other stuff like that. I mean, these are very discriminatory, algorithmically mediated practices that are illegal and were exposed. And people were like, oh, that's a mea culpa, we won't do that again. But then they do it again. Which is to say, so if we keep being like, hey, we're only going to handle this on a case-by-case basis, post hoc, when we discover that you are discriminating against a protected class, that is a bad way to operationalize this. This is how we do it right now. We need to be a lot more proactive. And in essence, if somebody is wantonly violating acceptable, or not even acceptable, they can be unacceptable, but engaging in illegal discriminatory practices, privileging insurrectionists, or what, you know, then A, that's known, but B, if you keep making the mistake over and over again, at some point you need to have individuals be responsible. So eventually you escalate into things like, we're going to remove your Section 230 liability protection. You're not a neutral platform privileging a conversation. You're actually driving illegal action or hate speech or whatever that looks like. Which is to say, it's, as Reagan said, right? Trust but verify that people are actually engaging in a free speech propagating platform. And we actually escalate pretty far, which is like, eventually you get to the point where, like, let me give you an example. If I'm a corporation and I'm the CFO and I cook my books, right? I go to jail. If I'm the CFO, I go to jail when I do something illegal, when I purposefully intervene to propagate something illegal. So every year I have to sign off on a bunch of forms saying, I have reviewed these forms and they are an honest assayance of what we're actually doing financially. If I'm the CTO and I cook my algorithms and I tell people I'm doing this, but actually I'm doing something completely different, there is no repercussion. And into an era where that has very real implications, that if I cook my algorithm to foster January 6th, that has very real implications.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
individually responsible.
Sasha, you said it right there. I mean, if you cook your algorithm and you're going to get a reward, because that's what the system is now, what's going to stop you from doing that?
100%.
You have no, and so everything now is based on self-regulation. And everybody thinks that they have sort of the ownership of what's right, and they're motivated by doing what's right, et cetera, et cetera. And we're starting to see that that's not true, or maybe not starting to see it. We should have accepted that it wasn't true, that everybody has their own biases. It doesn't matter what you look like, quite frankly. You have your own biases. I don't know how you don't make a reform or create guardrails that are going to be intrusive, Sasha. And like when you look at Germany and what the Germans have tried to do with, hate speech in the Third Reich, and moderating what can be spoken or referred to about the Third Reich and Nazism and all that sort of thing. In this country, that wouldn't cut it up to now. Maybe it would cut it now. I don't know, Sasha. Do you have a sense of what a good model would be going forward to address? I mean, and these are all very difficult problems. It's not like you can just come up with the solution.
And understanding that we're almost at time, so I know if you have to go, I know we don't have a lot of time with you, but your model is basically like the growing audits that allow us to watch, and then increasing liability based on those audits.
Correct.
And
so you start giving the benefit of the doubt, but one is not gullible enough to think like everyone's actually operating on the up and up, that self-regulation alone is a solution. Like, I lose track of how many times Facebook has illegally targeted little girls with their algorithms causing grave psychological harms. It's in the news again that like people are now committing suicide after talking to agentic AI. Like, these are real world meaningful implications. And every single time they're like, oh, we had no idea. And I'm like, they clearly did. We have enough whistleblowers that have disclosed that they knew exactly what they're doing, but there's no meaningful accountability. So think of the bank robber. Imagine if we handled bank robbery the same way. So banks get robbed. Occasionally we catch the robbers and we're like, hey, we just caught you. You robbed the bank. You need to return like 5% of the money you stole. What do we think would happen to bank robbery in the United States under that rubric?
Right.
Right? But that's how we handle this kind of sometimes illegal, certainly unethical action. Like when platforms target youth in violation of COPA, right? Like in violation of federal statute. If the answer is like, we're going to give you like a little slap on the wrist, we are actively incentivizing the future breaking of federal law.
Yeah. I have a thing with Facebook though. I think Zuckerberg he's kind of like a deer caught in headlights. I don't think he realized the monster that had been created. Sheryl Sandberg, to me, is the villain there. I think she saw this and knew how to monetize
and you can say
it.
that because I'm not responsible for it.
Well, seriously, I mean, I think she ran circles around him, and he was like, "Oh shit, what happened?" And I think he's kind of had a coming of age, like, "Oh shit, what did I do?"
But he's also overcorrecting, because that's, I think, what we're seeing with the Trump dynamic, which is, they deplatform Trump, and then they're overcorrecting for having done that in a way that's created all kinds of strange lines and strange bedfellows. But ultimately, I think what you're saying is so important, because it's what the Europeans have seen, where a lot of tech companies see the fines in Europe, and they basically gauge, well, we'd rather pay the fine than invest in having to fix things so that we're not doing the things that they don't want us to do, because it's just easier.
And the GDPR framework, we are still waiting to see how escalating fines are operationalized, right? Because you actually can go after like percentages of global revenue. So this thing can amp up to an actual pain point. Clearly, we're not there yet, because Facebook is like, oh, $4 billion. Yeah, we'll just pay that. And we've had like, 4 or 5 different rulings from the Irish European Court slapping them with these big fine. I mean, they're not small fines, but like if I'm making 10 billion, I got to return 4.
Yeah, it's a rounding error for them.
And to their credit, like, the GDPR has actually facilitated that there's things you can get taken down offline that in the US you would have no recourse to do. So at least that. But just because we're running out of time with you, Sasha, and I want to be respectful of that, we also want to get your thoughts on the FCC side of this on the broadcast networks with Jimmy Kimmel. And obviously there's big money there. Jeremy was just talking about right before you came on about the business interests of stations being licensed and exchanged and all of that. And so curious for how you see what's happening at the FCC and how problematic it might be.
I mean, extremely. What Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC, is doing right now is unprecedented in the modern era, which is to say there is clearly active censorial action being propagated by a federal agency on behalf of the executive branch against perceived enemies. And the fact that they're targeting first and foremost the comedians tells you how serious this is, right? They're the canaries in the coal mine. If you can't be satirical about a strong man, I'm like, what does this sound like? It sounds like an authoritarian regime doing what authoritarian regimes all around the globe have done since time immemorial. So I look at this as, again, an indicator of what is likely to come unless there is enough meaningful blowback to prevent this kind of action from continuing. And, we got multiple now cases where there has been, weirdly, the cancel culture that the cancel culture groups have declared to be anathema to Americanism being propagated out of that same sector of society. And again, to me, it goes to this lack of integrity amongst certain elements in society. Like, I can have a big kumbaya moment with all my libertarian friends because we're like, this sucks. This is terrible.
I never thought I would say thank God for Karl Rove and Tucker Carlson, who both came out today arguing against it.
Exactly.
Well, I think it was one of the first times, I was at CBS for years. I've never seen an FCC commissioner talking to an affiliate about a network's programming.
Yes.
I mean, it just doesn't happen. And it's almost like they're colluding.
Correct.
To get ABC to pressure them. I mean, because the affiliates are always, that's the way in. Correct. And Carr was talking to, the CEO of Nexstar and Tegna, and it's just like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah. And I mean, installing an ombudsman on behalf of a federal government mandate to look over that feels very strong, man.
And that's the CBS example.
At CBS, the payoffs directly from media outlets directly to the president of the United States. Like, I mean, were this pretty much any other country, we would simply call it corruption.
By the
if
way,
this
that's
was
a
a
great
Netflix
job,
show,
the ombudsman at CBS. You work 1 day a month and you get 250,000 a year. I'd
Wow.
I want that job, right?
you should apply.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible. If this was a Netflix show, we would say that they jumped the shark. It's just not believable. That's
Yeah.
where we are in America today. So
That's
Sasha, I know we went way over, so I thank you so much for your
No,
time.
my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
This was
I
lovely.
appreciate you. Let me know next time you're back in DC. We'd love to catch up again.
All right, I'll be there probably next week because, like a moth to an open flame, I am drawn to DC.
Very nice. Well, looking forward to seeing you, and
Nice
thanks again.
meeting you, yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Lovely, gentlemen. Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye.
I mean, honestly, like this week, you can't make this up. I mean, I was 14 years at CBS, and this would have never happened. Like
Yeah.
5 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, it just, you don't have the chairman of the FCC almost colluding with an affiliate body to influence what the network airs.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question, Jeremy.
Mhm.
I'm going to throw this at you. So how is Kimmel doing as far as, let's go through like the whole list that we did, just like with Colbert, right?
Mhm.
How is he selling? Is his product selling? One, I'm just going to, because you hear different opinions on this, right? You hear the First Amendment discussion and the collusion, and if the government called and basically, went after this guy for telling jokes that the government doesn't like. All right. The questions that are popping up, again, the capitalist side, was he becoming too much of a headache for his network to deal with, given that, the government was going to call them up and tell them that they had problems with it, that it just became a business decision with big implications, right? With First Amendment implications. How do you look at this, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, the ad market for late night is dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very challenging market. And you have to look at how much does a show generate in revenue versus how much does it cost. It's probably neutral. I mean, but then you have the affiliate issue, and the affiliates get cantankerous. And a lot of these stations are in conservative districts.
Mm-hmm.
They're in red states, and this is red meat for them.
Yeah.
And so to a point where, Disney owns ABC, and it's a publicly traded company, and they have a board of directors and they have stockholders, and they're going to make a decision based on that.
Yeah.
It's not about his, it's really, the sad thing is his First Amendment rights are like the least important part of this. It's all about money. It's about your affiliates. It's about FCC. And Disney's going to want to buy stuff.
Yep.
And look,
so
I think the whole broadcast model is just on its last legs anyway.
Yeah.
And I think it's the law of unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
When Zuckerberg and Twitter and all them were either suspending or deplatforming Donald Trump, it seemed like a good idea at the time. But there's a backlash that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and to some extent, rightly so, because you've got to figure out, like, to Sasha's point earlier, like where that liability falls and where it lands, and how you balance that. But at the same time, I think what they're risking is Jimmy Kimmel, whatever he says going forward, is going to get just that much more attention online,
Mm-hmm.
that much reverberation.
Yep.
And so you're creating someone potentially much more platformed, because online he'll be able to go a bunch of different places and create a bunch of different noise that I think is the unanticipated pushback.
Yeah,
But
the thing is,
it seems that that's the case with every crisis that we're seeing, Luis. The same thing is being said by the Charlie Kirk world, right? That the horrible thing that happened to him only works to the benefit of the message or the things that he was talking about. And now you're going to have Kimmel also benefiting from the crisis. I don't know if it's the same thing with Colbert, but I watched Colbert, I think it was Monday after he received the award, and he was looking at that as validation for the things that he's been saying. So, I mean,
at the Emmys?
Yeah. We go back to this whole thing about selling, and outrage sells, crisis seems to sell, and there's something seriously there's something seriously wrong with that model.
Well,
Well,
Disney makes more money off ice cream cones at their theme parks than they do on Kimmel's show.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's
yeah.
loud, and
what
it's
about
the
those
face of
giant
the
turkey
network. It's
legs?
like the news, but it's a headache.
Yeah.
Those
And
giant turkey
they're-
legs have to be a great profit model.
well, they're going to take their licks now, but you know what? In a month, no one's going to be talking about this.
Well, you would think that,
just
but
rip
like,
the Band-Aid off now, and
because
move
Carl
on.
brought up the Emmys, Jeremy, you like to say that the Emmys are dead anyway and irrelevant at this point, but and I think they made themselves a little bit more relevant because as much as I like Stephen Colbert, he was not the best of late night, and
Right.
it almost feels like a vote intended to give him something to prop him up because he lost his show, when arguably the Daily Show has been doing a much better late
Right.
night job, or Saturday Night Live for that matter, and what do you think of that? Like, how long can we expect broadcast TV to sort of remain relevant?
I don't even know if it's relevant now.
Wow.
Because you ask someone under 30 years old what network they watch. They don't know networks.
But they're
know
watching it on social
channels.
media, but it's often coming from
Yeah.
mainstream networks, and so that's the weird dichotomy of this, that people are not watching content in the way that it's initially presented, but they're getting it, whether through Instagram. I know that when the three of us chat, oftentimes I might be providing something that's coming from social media, but it is from a network or major news media publication or something like that.
But it's pennies to dollars. Like the money has always been on broadcast television, the ads, and the digital was always a second thought. I'd be interested to see now if those clips on YouTube and online are being monetized, where they're getting more money for that than broadcast.
I was doing a quick sort of assessment of even how we watch TV in our house. Besides, the Netflixes and the Apples that we get movies from, right? We might watch the news, the local news, but then it's ESPN, right? So it's movies, ESPN, local news, and then if you ask my kids, it's Mr. Beast. I mean,
right.
It's like nobody's really. I mean, we'll watch Saturday Night Live when we can, but we might not even watch it Saturday night. We might watch it at another time. So there's definitely a change in the model. The things that Sasha was talking about, I think, are an important variable in defining who's watching and what they're watching.
Yeah.
And I don't see traditional media filling in the gap.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I for one think that what I'm hearing is that these major news organizations need to figure out what ice cream they're selling.
Yep.
Because you're going to have to sell that ice cream to be able to sustain the other operations that are worth keeping, because as they transition to the online world, they're just not going to be able to monetize them in the same way.
Right.
And so you've got to figure out where you're selling your ice cream. I know that in a past episode where we talked about the Stephen Colbert issue, Jeremy, you talked about the New York Times as a great model because they're independent. They have their subscription base, and their subscription base helps them avoid having the FCC type of issues that the broadcast channels and networks have. That people have to figure out a revenue model that insulates them from this transition to online consumption in places where they're often just not able to monetize.
Absolutely.
Well,
and we also have a timely guest in the former Deputy Foreign Minister of Panama.
Former Deputy Foreign Minister of Panama, Carlos Ruiz-Hernández. And Mr. Ruiz-Hernández was also the former ambassador of Panama to the United Nations. So we're really happy to have him. Ambassador, it's great to have you. The return of U.S. troops to Panama, even without bases, has reignited debates many thought were closed 25 years ago. And you've described this shift as part of something that you've coined the Molino Doctrine, to describe Panama's approach to this great power competition. As Panama currently holds the U.S. or the UN Security Council presidency, and President Molino heads to New York for bilateral discussions with the Trump administration I guess during UNGA. How does this doctrine represent a fundamental shift from reactive nationalism to strategic selectivity? How do you see that?
Well, I mean, yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I mean, I think, yeah, you covered most of. Panama was president of the UN Security Council last month in August. I mean, right now, there's no official. Just to clarify a little bit, there's no official bilateral meetings between Trump. I mean, we'll hope that let's hope that there will be some interaction, but it's about UNGA. It's about what the UN General Assembly this year will be. President Molino is ready. He's been ready since we've been talking to the Americans since even before Trump. So, yeah, I mean, I think what we're witnessing, I think it's some sort of Metternickian geopolitical hardcore realism that's happening not just in the region but in the world, right? So I think small state diplomacy has become creative, and I think that's what the president of Panama has done in terms of talking about sovereignty, neutrality, China, the United States back in the hemisphere, the rhetoric, all those things were in place. And I think the way we looked at it, the way that I've been thinking about it right after, when I left, after I resigned, is mainly three pillars. And that's what I wanted to call the Molino Doctrine. This selective engagement rather than just blanket alignment, which is very important for foreign policy, but is also important for domestic policy for Panamanians and all small states. This other component that I saw a lot with this, President Molino is he's an institutional man. It's institutional hedging rather than just dramatic confrontation. I mean, the rhetoric calls for drama, but if we stick to the institutions that we have, the institutions that are in place, even though a lot of them are under stress, it'll get you to the finish line. And then the other component that we talked and I've been writing about or trying to attempt to write is this whole idea of have strategic patience rather than just reactive nationalism, which is the one thing that, particularly in Panama, after all the rhetoric that the president-elect at a time, the first time he talked about the Panama Canal, let's just not let the nationalism back there and back here. Let's just be strategically patient, and then we'll engage with conversation. So that's kind of like the framework that, and I think that's the only thing that will help right now, because whether we like it or not, there's a lot of debates right now here in Washington. Great power competition is right to our shores. I mean, you can disagree on the theory, but you can't disagree on the fact that China is in the region, engaging in the region, has been for decades, and now the United States has some sort of push that it's very visible, and some extremes have some people uncomfortable, but at the very same time, you have great partners like President Molino in Panama ready to engage. And that's basically this whole UN Security Council. Like as you know, the UN Panama, we're here for 2 years. We'll be at the Security Council for 2 years, which gives us this unique opportunity to contribute to this conversation about great power competition and everything that's happening globally. For us, it's about maritime security, and that's what we've put at the right front and center of what we can contribute. I mean, and in that space, we've had a number of high cabinet level meetings and visits. I mean, the last time before Secretary Hegseth went down there in April, the last time that a defense secretary went down there was 2004. So, I mean, there's a lot of things happening in the relationship, which I think is very exciting, and I think is very important for not just Panamanians, but for the broader conversation engagement with the United States looking ahead.
Yeah, but there are some issues, as you know, that get a lot of people's attention, right? This whole approach that the administration has taken, this America First approach, and basically bolstering, the Western Hemisphere to be sort of the centerpiece of that policy. It's created what some call sort of this reinvigorated or new Monroe Doctrine moment. I remember from history, Monroe Doctrine was this manifest destiny of the United States, not just for North America, but for the rest of the region, right? How is this approach, and you said, you've had both Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rubio visiting Panama. Has this empowered Panama? Has this empowered your strategic position, let's say, in the Western Hemisphere? Or do you look at this from another vantage point? Do you look at this as maybe even being pushed around by the United States? How are you looking at this moment?
I mean, that's the key. I mean, it's a great question. Paradoxically, this attention, Trump's pressure, and let's call it pressure because I'm reluctant to use qualifications and adjectives like that because sometimes are not helpful with the strategic reality, with the reality that we have. But yes, paradoxically, I think what Trump's rhetoric and Trump's attention has been Panama's strategic gift. I mean, that's the way to look at it. It's the way to make lemonade out of lemons. For the first time in decades, my country is back at the center agenda in Washington. I mean, it doesn't matter how you disguise it. You look at history, you read the newspapers. This is how foreign policy works. I mean, this high-level American engagement, whether it's rhetoric, whether it's visited, it is a strategic gift. I mean, we're back in the agenda. As I mentioned, I mean, it was the last time a defense secretary visited Panama was 2004. I mean, in this, it's what we want to make of it. The United States is our longest partner, is the most important strategic ally. President Molino is a pro-democracy, pro-capitalism, pro-America president. We inherit this, every conversation about China, we inherit, right? From what I see and what I'm sure President Molino is very convinced as well, we're very, I forgot the word in English, very myopic, very not very myopic, not very smart strategically. Nobody, when Panama back in 2017 canceled its relationship, historic relationship with Taiwan, brought China into a short. Xi Jinping went there, and right after a few weeks, the former president lied to the ambassador. It's a very good friend of ours, Ambassador Feely, was down there. He was lied to his face about, no, we're never going to do this. Don't worry, you'll be the first ones to know. And then less than 24 hours later, I mean, it was very dramatic, very not strategic, right? So, I mean, the fact that we inherited that situation, President Molino, with all the situations are happening, domestic politics, we just came from a bad year. The previous administration came from a very challenging period. All of a sudden, we had to have this conversation about China. And we had to do it in a manner that made strategic sense, and it's in line with our values. President Molino immediately, he decided, we put it in the table, we studied, we decided to get out of this BRI, Belt and Road Initiative's 27, 29 MOUs. I mean, imagine this, Panama was the one country in the hemisphere that signed every MOU out there that was proposed by the Chinese when all this thing happened. And by that, I don't mean that Panama should engage with China. That's not what I'm suggesting here. It's just that all this was done in a transactional manner that didn't bring any benefits to the, and President Molino just put it very, very clearly. He said, I think the phrase that he used is like, this made more headlines than actual infrastructure projects. So to even have a conversation and be grilled by concerns, this is just ridiculous. So, and then that kind of, Secretary Rubio went down there and it achieved what years of diplomacy with the U.S. have. I mean, the BRI, we started this conversation about the Hutchinson Port, BlackRock deal. All of this happened around that time. I mean, it's a concession that, President Molino himself is a maritime attorney. And he's been in this, he knows very well about this concession and what has happened over the decades, the renovation of the concession, how it happened the last year of the previous administration. All those things started to make sense. And then we needed strategic clarity. And then that's why I believe that this was it was a catalyst. I mean, the conversations, I mean, the rhetoric that the president of the United States started bringing about the Panama Canal obviously was not helpful in many ways. At the same time, we need to conduct our affairs with the most important partner we have. And okay, what's underneath all this stuff is obviously great power competition. It's
Yeah,
China.
but here's the deal. It just seems that this tightening of this approach that the Trump administration has used, it's getting some sort of reaction, right? Migration flows through the Darien Gap are down 93%. The EU has removed Panama from the money laundering lists, and new trade agreement reviews are upcoming. How does the Panama model offer lessons for other Central American states? Is it that you're just going to be bludgeoned and then you're just going to respond to American pressure? Or do you actually see this as an opportunity for Panama in this new framework that we're seeing that has the focus on the Western Hemisphere?
I mean, for Panama, and I'll say this, like we are lucky in that sense, because I'll tell you why. You mentioned migration. President Molino is someone that is very much aligned with a lot of the policies that immediately come to your mind that the Trump administration would want out of the hemisphere. We want less migration, we want more security, we want more law and order, we want partners, we want people to be on our side all the time, every time, no questions asked. I mean, the migration question in Panama was, I mean, by the way, it is the Biden administration, the last leg, because remember, President Molino started his term in July. President Biden was still very much the president of the United States. And it is with the Biden administration that we signed the day one. President Molino, for him, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. We have a migration problem that we haven't created. We have a lot of very complex conversations around migration and cartels with the Petro administration in Colombia, which is complicating the way we can respond to this. We need a partner. And it just so happens that the migration that was happening crossing international illegal border crossings in Panama, it's heading to the United States. So it's ridiculous that we're not working closely together with the United States. So that's why we signed that very first MOU with Secretary Mayorkas at a time. And for President Molino, it was all about, let's reset the relationship and be ready to tackle the issue. Not American politics, not ideologies, the issue. Same thing with China. I mean, a very unfortunately, I said this in private roundtables, CFR here in DC, some think tanks. President Molino, and I say this openly, I took the job, and I did write about this. I didn't vote for President Molino. I took the job because President Molino was very serious about tackling migration the right way, looking at the China issue the right way, and a number of other things are other priorities. The gray lists, President Molino make sure that this whole thing, Panama Papers, was the most unfair thing in the world that happened to us, and we're carrying with this reputation. So all of the policies that you see getting out of the BRI, the conversations with Taiwan, whether they have happened or will happen or not happen, this look at Washington and just play ball with them with Venezuela or what's going on down there, drugs, right? So all those things President Molino had in place way before Trump even got elected into office. I mean, this whole BRI thing, I was the vice foreign minister for 6 months, way before President Trump arrived, and all this memos, all this stuff is there, and we were ready to do it. It's just so that the rhetoric and the style of the who sits in the White House, it takes all the oxygen out of the conversations, right? But it's not. That doesn't mean that there's capitulation in any possible way.
Yeah, but the guy that's here, Luis, was there before the guy that's there now, because he was with Secretary Mayorkas. Luis, I don't know if you want to dig into that.
I think that you brought it up, and it's a really good point that we did sign that memorandum of understanding to basically support Panama in its repatriations under its own law of migrants who had crossed into Panama without authorization through the Darien. And there's criticism, as there always is, from all sides on any kind of thing. But it is an example of how the work that needs to happen between countries needs to happen regardless of who's in office. And so you're someone who, beyond being ambassador to the UN, your stint as a deputy foreign minister, you've also worked here in the United States before. And so how can we best describe and just lay out why this relationship matters to an average audience that doesn't follow the Western Hemisphere closely, and that is thinking, why should we care about Panama?
I mean, of course, it's a good question. I mean, it's at the heart of the issue, and the bilateral relationship is about that. And that's why I mentioned that paradoxically, the intense, somewhat toxic rhetoric about taking Panama Canal back. We give it to Panama. We didn't give it to China. All that stuff. It's the style of the president, right? I mean, when you see you pass the rhetoric and you have to work policy, because you have to continue the relationship. I think what's there, I mean, the rhetoric and the pressure flush out things like, for example, at some point, President Molino, and he did this before even Trump, he started thinking about this even before Trump was elected president, doing an audit on the concessions of the Chinese ports, the Hong Kong Bay, the company, Hutchinson Ports. He wanted to do an audit because he knew that. And then what happened right after that, because of the rhetoric, because of the U.S. pressure, President Trump indirectly, or maybe there's a strategy there. He flushed out. What happened? He flushed out China, PRC, Beijing's intentions. He flushed out. What I mean is, the PRC said about Costco, we oppose this deal. We oppose BlackRock and MSC's deal because we want Costco to have decision-making power in whatever structure is going to come out of this. So now you see how China wants to influence decisions on private entities and financial, ports, maritime security, all that stuff. What the President Molino did, he just went himself, because he believes in institutions, he believes in the law, and challenge from the government. He challenged and filed a lawsuit in the Supreme Court of Panama to take the concession away, because we're not going to allow either Americans or Chinese to meddle with what we have inside, and that's where the sovereignty conversation.
Carlos, has President Trump's approach, right? His very sort of aggressive approach, has it helped President Molino take the measurements or the measures that he's taking in Panama?
That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, has it helped him domestically?
Has it helped? Has it made it easier?
Has it helped domestically? I don't think President Trump intends to either hurt or help President Molino domestically. I mean, I'm pretty sure he, as at heart, needs a partner in the region. And what is unfortunate, again, I repeat it, all of what President Trump has wanted and asked and put pressure on are things that President Molino himself took the initiative to do himself. So whether it has help or not, President Molino kept his blueprint. He kept his strategic patience. I'm going to use my institutions. I'm going to call fall strikes. And he did. Secretary Rubio went on there. He had a very constructive meeting the week that he went. I think it was March. He was down there, and about a week later, there was, I don't know what happened here at the State Department, and then this press release came that said something that it wasn't agreed upon in the bilateral meeting, and President Molino was the first one, not aggressively. He said, "Hey, that was a lie. I don't know what's going on. That's not how it happened." So President Molino to this day stands as the guy that, hey, I received the Americans here. This is what I said. This is what they said. And then when some I don't know, malign, or when something happened around the conversation, President Molino was the first one to call. Hey,
but you're making very clear that these were measures that President Molino was already taking or was going to take.
100%. I mean, I keep bringing my personal experience with this. I took the job because President Molino had a very clear foreign policy agenda, and I signed up for it. And a lot of this, it resonates with what the current president of the United States, and by the way, the former president of the United States and his team want out of China and want out of a partner in terms of migration. The most important thing for us Panamanians and for President Molino is that he won't be president forever. President Trump's going to be president. He's not going to be president forever. What's important,
So we hope.
well, I mean, at this point, what's important is that the relationship stays working.
Yeah.
Channels are
Yeah.
open.
No, that's
move
fair.
forward on the agenda.
And Panama's a tenth of the size of Venezuela, but has such an impactful role in commerce. 40% of U.S. container traffic, billions and billions and billions of dollars of trade that move through it, and of course, as you pointed out, an incredible hub in terms of the security dynamic because of the movement through the Darien Canal, and one of the few countries that can help facilitate movement between both the Pacific and the Caribbean. When we see a lot of the narco trafficking moving up the Pacific. So it's a really strategically vital country and strategically important partner. So my question to you, and I know that we're getting close here to the end of your time, but you've seen thousands of people already take to the streets to protest this new era of having American troops once again on the ground in Panama. We've seen U.S. forces more broadly in the Caribbean take down now 2 fast boats that were allegedly moving narcotics. And in the context of all of that, is there a line that you think could be crossed that would exacerbate concerns from Panamanian civil society and just the general population, or do you think that this new era of intense engagement from the Trump administration is really the beginning of the new normal?
It's great questions. I think the relationship between Panama and the United States has been plagued with a number of incidents over and over. And then, you've seen them all through the region. And populations react to this type of nationalism. The problem is that a lot of the domestic actors, political actors, they see in this nationalistic response and this reactive historical, in the case of Panama, neutrality, in the case of Panama, sovereignty. There is, at the heart of the question, at the heart of the rhetoric, I did have to ask the question to both secretaries who I was able to interact with. Are you planning to invade? Are you going to take the canal back? You just got to let me know. This guy, you have to ask the question. But once you know the answer is absolutely not. Secretary Hegseth himself said it on Panamanian soil. We respect your sovereignty. We respect the sovereignty of the Panamanian people over its canal. We're here to help. Once you get that, you can work, and it becomes a domestic political problem rather than it's a PR problem. How do you communicate a message in a way that is helpful, that is constructive? We live in the era that we live right now, and we know the conversations are happening. That's a very difficult thing to do because of social media, because of the rhetoric themselves. Kind of, looking for the policies in the midst of all this fog is very hard. Is very difficult. So, in the case of Panama, of course, there will always space for talk about what generations in the past have done. My generation owes a great deal to a number of Panamanians that went out and did what they were catalysts, and they took advantage of the Cold War and what was happening historically, and we got the canal to be in Panamanian hands. I don't think that's where we are right now. So we have to use what we have in the tools that we have right now. We have the channels open. We have an administration that wants to engage with us for a number of regions, for a number of problems that are happening in the region, and we have to pick up the phone. Let me
just ask you a quick question, because we're going to come on the end, and I think Luis teed up a very good opportunity. What would you like to get out of your relationship with the United States? What do you want to get out of this episode or chapter with the U.S.?
We Panamanians, we tend to think we're the center of the world and we're the heart of the universe or something. There's a say like that where I come from. Clearly, I don't care much about that because I don't even remember the phrase. I don't think the identity of my country lies on this kind of catchy phrases. I think what I want to get, what I hope that the Panamanian people get out of this relationship is a lot of progress. Panama had, like I said at the beginning, we haven't been at the center of the Washington agenda for decades. The opportunities are endless, I think. We are we have people here that because if we can speak the language that they're speaking on the particular issues that they care about, I think there's a host of things and a rainbow of opportunities out there. We just have to be creative. I mean, if they want to speak security, okay, let's figure it out how cybersecurity works. Let's just get creative about taking advantage of somebody picking up the phone. And that way we create development. I mean, all the private sector, Panama is all about business. It's all about being a hub. So once those things stabilize, we can get the rhetoric to work in our benefit. And I think that that's what the best we can hope for. And keep in mind the uncertainty. I mean, we live in uncertain times. I mean, the White House says one thing one week, and then the next week they'll say something even a little larger. And then that's how there is a system. It is a policy system that works for them. So we have to figure it out how to read it and how to take advantage of it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate, Ambassador, your expertise, and it's invaluable just in this moment of like growing tensions and growing dynamics. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for guys, Carl and Luis, for having me. It's always an honor, and hope we can grab coffee together.
Thank you. No, this is great. We really appreciate it. You've been super flexible. Thank you.
All right, my brother. I'll see you guys soon.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you to our listeners for listening. I think it was a great episode, and appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and share it with your friends. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Jeremy.
That's right. Cheers.
Cheers. Our panel featured Luis Miranda, former Obama White House communications advisor and former spokesperson at DHS, Carl Meacham, former Clinton appointee and a former senior Republican staff on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Jeremy Murphy, former CBS executive, author, and publicist.